Hello and welcome to episode 47A of Question and Answer. I am your host, Panyo Basa. And the Q&A that I just did lasted for more than 3 hours, and I was hoarse from talking for 3 hours straight, and I stopped and had a little bit of dinner, got myself a glass of bovine glandular secretions to kind of soothe my throat. And now I'm back at it to answer one last question. And even before the Q&A went for 3 hours, I figured that I was probably going to have to make this a separate show just to do justice to this one question. And I read it on the Q&A, but I didn't answer it. So I'm going to read it again here and then try to answer it as best I can. It's really a major question, and I'll just do my best. The question is from Arain, and Arain says, I think a large blind spot in the Dharma may be that when acting in a dharmic way towards people in the modern world, especially in a culturally confused and crime-ridden melting pot, more often than not you are dealing with crude humans who are unable to receive or even recognize Dharma. Continuing to interact with them in a dharmic fashion will be met with no results, and in many cases even inflame or embolden their behavior because they immediately recognize you as weak or passive and will double down and intensify their behavior or predation. Does Buddhism have any way of dealing with this besides disassociation or simply allowing people to mow you down, steal from you, or kill you? Obviously, saying that your own karma put you in that situation does not solve anything. I'm sure it works just fine in a monastery full of strict monks. Lay people have to deal with predatory and criminal chimps every day on the street, at work, or in their own neighborhood, where short of quitting your job or selling your house, you must be able to protect yourself or use forceful means to make them stop. I guess the main question is, beyond self-victimization, karma blaming, or continually ignoring, enabling, and disassociating, what is an actual solution for a layperson who is dealing with being continually assaulted or robbed by a person who doesn't give a fuck about your dharmic way of attempting to make them stop? And this question was submitted in the Q&A room of the Discord server, and some wise guy put the emoji underneath this of crossed swords because this person is challenging Dharma, saying that there is a large blind spot and so on. And also it caused a certain amount of commentary from other members of the group, including one person who said, I asked a similar question once in Ajahn Nyanamoli's channel. His answer gets me rather annoyed, although I kind of get where he comes from. I asked about protecting my family and killing an armed robber if they come to my house, and he said somewhere along the line of, well, that's kind of the risk of having a family. You can't fully practice Dhamma. And then another person left this comment. I doubt the Buddha spent a lot of time going around telling lay people not to defend their families from immediate threats or telling kings that they should never punish violent criminals. It seems like there is no shortage of people who actually treat each other badly for no good reason, that you could spend a lifetime on scolding those people before you got around to telling decent folk about how they need to be complete pacifists. So there's a lot to cover or a lot to unpack. The ultimate answer, I think, is fairly straightforward, but still there's a lot of statements made here that I probably should address. The first one, I think a large blind spot in the Dharma may be, and then Arain goes into this, I really don't think there's a blind spot in the Dharma. I mean, Dharma acknowledges the reality that if you live in this world, there's going to be shit happening, and the best way of dealing with that is just renounce the world. That doesn't mean that you just go into a cushy monastery. I mean, nowadays, a lot of the time it does. But in the Buddhist time, you went out and just flung yourself upon the mercy of the universe, and essentially on just the power of your own merit from doing that. And there were, I mean, in the Buddhist time, there were probably a higher density of bad people than nowadays. Nowadays, we're living in an age of spiritual mediocrity. There's fewer saints and also fewer sociopaths, fewer psychopaths, fewer mass murderers. I mean, in the Buddha's time, I mean, a lot of the sociopathic mass murderers were kings, were running countries. And I mean, nowadays, I mean, we may have like a senile buffoon as the leader of the country. It's still like a constitutional republic, and just like having people tortured to death that you don't like doesn't happen much anymore. Maybe among cartels on the Mexican border with the USA, but not in America as a whole. So it's not really a blind spot in the Dharma, because the Dharma addresses the issue that there's going to be this kind of shit happening, especially if you live as a layperson. You're going to have a family that you are duty bound to protect. You have a home and like property that you are duty bound to protect. And so by renouncing all that sort of stuff, you're not so much escaping from reality, but in a way you're getting closer to reality, because you've got fewer distractions to distract you from the essence of experience, the essence of existence. So, referring to the culturally confused and crime-ridden melting pot where lay people have to deal with bad people, yeah, I suppose in Chicago or Detroit or some big city, your chances of meeting with like mentally disturbed and potentially violent people is greater than living in a small town, for example. In the Buddhist time, they had bandits and so forth that were infesting forests, so you might be better off in the city, although you're probably more of a target for kings and just sociopathic administrators and so forth. So let's continue down this question here. Continually interact with them in a dharmic fashion will be met with no results, and in many cases even inflame or embolden their behavior, because they immediately recognize you as weak or passive and will double down. That's not necessarily true either. If you interact in a dharmic fashion, for starters, you will be calm and you will not be afraid. And predators, if they detect fear, they're more likely to go for it. And also, if you react in some sort of violent, agitated way, again, it's going to inflame a predator even more. You know, it's going to be like violent feedback feeding their own violence. So remaining calm and unafraid is a dharmic approach, and if you're not afraid of them, they're going to think twice before they mess with you. And also, if you remain calm, then it's not going to be like feeding their violence. And I watched a movie not too long ago. It's a relatively well-known movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats. And it's based on a true story. I think the U.S. Army was actually experimenting with kind of psychological ways of dealing with enemies. And I think it kind of fizzled out. Not much came of it. But it was like, if there's a violent person confronting you, then you remain calm and kind of neutral. I mean, you don't do anything that's going to inflame them. And a lot of the time, that is enough to just kind of fizzle out their aggression. The aggression doesn't meet with any obstacle, you know. It's not pushing against anything, and so it's just kind of, you know, it just kind of wears itself out. I mean, it doesn't always happen that way, but a lot of psychos, I mean, they feed on the fear. You know, they want you to struggle against them, and that kind of encourages them to keep going. So a dharmic approach would include that. I mean, if you wanted to be super saintly, the really dharmic approach is you beam love at your enemies. And it's not just Buddhism that teaches that. Christianity is better known for the whole idea of loving your enemies, blessing those that curse you. And there were some early Christians who really took that to heart. I mean, they might get fed to lions, but they're blessing the lions and the people that set the lions loose on them. You know, they're singing hymns. They're rejoicing that they're dying in the name of Jesus Christ or whatever. And that's extreme. I mean, that's more than you can expect from the average person, even the average like lay Buddhist. But to interact with a bad person in a dharmic fashion, it doesn't matter if they have any appreciation for Dharma or Buddhism, because most of it is happening at a subconscious level anyway. Like even like a vicious dog, you know, it's like acting afraid or running or whatever is just going to like kick in the predator instinct. And it's the same with predatory humans. So in that respect, Dharma can at least keep you calm and unafraid, which is going to reduce the odds of bad shit happening. It's not just going to embolden, I mean, maybe a few. They might see you as just some sort of passive beta that's an easy mark or some such. So let's see here, I'll scroll down here a little bit. Does Buddhism have any way of dealing with this besides disassociation or simply allowing people to mow you down, steal from you, or kill you? Well, that's really getting to the meat of it. A layperson living in the world, interacting with bad people sometimes, having a family and a home to defend. I mean, you can't really call a man if he's not going to defend his family. I remember I used to have this friend. He was a monk for many years. And then he dropped out of the monkhood. He got married. He had a wife and a stepdaughter. And he was just really uncompromising in keeping 5 precepts. Just uncompromising. I mean, he was a relatively saintly guy. And I asked him once, what happens if someone assaults your wife right in front of you? And amazingly, this guy, he says, well, it would be her karma, wouldn't it? And it's like, how can you be a man and not defend your own woman or defend your own family? I mean, you may be a human male, but I mean, you're unworthy of the name man if that's the approach you're going to take. I mean, if you've got a woman, then you should defend that woman. If you've got children, you really should defend your children. Even if you've got a house, I mean, you really should stop somebody from breaking in and stealing your stuff. So the layperson has to really, I mean, after I stopped being a monk, I really thought about this a lot, that, I mean, there's a certain stoicism in being a lay Buddhist, because you can't take the route of being a saint. It's sort of like the tantric path of you have to transmute like vice into something spiritual. And in a ways, like the way of the samurai or the Bushido, where, I mean, you may have to kill enemies, but at least you're not doing it motivated by hatred or rage, you know, this ill will, anything like that. It's just duty. It's you do what needs to be done. You remain calm, you know, no hatred in your heart, no rage in your heart. You just do what needs to be done. And by doing it calmly, you do it better. You're better able to defend your home if you remain calm. You know, it's like James Bond mentality. You know, he doesn't get all worked up. He does what needs to be done, effectively and efficiently. So, even though I was a Buddhist monk for 30 years, I have a woman and a home now. And if somebody starts breaking into my home, I'm going to load the Glock and I'm going to deal with it. Calling the cops may not work. They might not show up for 20 or 30 minutes. But you remain calm. And at least you're not motivated by hatred. I mean, you're still going to make bad karma. You just have to take the hit because, I mean, I'm not a monk anymore. I'm just of my own volition. I have chosen to live the life of a householder now. And so there are times when I just have to do non-dharmic things. But, I mean, you can still add as much dharma as possible. Even if you're shooting an intruder in your house, at least you're doing it, like, with a certain equanimity. I don't think it's possible to have complete equanimity when killing somebody, because deep down, I mean, there's this connection. But still, I mean, you're not motivated by hatred, which is just increases hatred. Hatred increases hatred. Anger increases anger. So, in a way, that's where you just cut it off. I mean, there's a famous verse in the Dhammapada that hatred or enmity is not ended by enmity. Enmity is ended by non-enmity, and this is an eternal law. And it's not just Buddhism that teaches this. It's any kind of advanced spiritual system teaches it. Also, Christianity teaches the same thing. They even take it farther with, like, love your enemies, bless those that curse you. You know, and there have been Christians who actually take this seriously. I mean, if you really want to be a completely saintly person, then you would consider it to be worse to kill than to be killed, and just let yourself get killed. But I mean, if you're alone, you may be able to make that saintly choice, but to just let your family be killed without lifting a finger, just passively, again, I mean, you're unworthy of being called a man or a husband or a father in that case. So you do what needs to be done, but you do it with as little anger and hatred in your heart as possible. You just do what needs to be done. It's not just fatalistic, I have to accept whatever happens. Maybe if you're a monk, but even a monk is allowed to strike out in self-defense. So I'll just continue scrolling down here. I'm sure it works just fine in a monastery full of strict monks. Again, in ancient India, there were psychopaths, and some of them were kings ruling countries that were just violent, bloodthirsty psychopaths. A lot of kings became kings by killing their own father or killing their own brother. And according to Buddhism, if you kill your own father, you're guaranteed of hell in your next life. So let's see. You must be able to protect yourself and use forceful means to make people stop doing the bad things. Yeah, that's fine, but it doesn't necessarily involve hatred or anger. You just do what needs to be done. And I mean, if you can do it compassionately, maybe even a little metta, a little friendly feeling in your heart, then that is best. The more positive the mental states, the better it is. Even if you've got to like defend your home or something, using negative mental states, it just makes bad karma that comes back on you. I mean, there's just no escape from that. So here it says, I guess the main question is, beyond self-victimization, karma blaming, or continually ignoring and enabling and disassociating, what is an actual solution for a layperson who is dealing with being continually assaulted or robbed by a person who doesn't give a fuck about your dharmic way of attempting to make them stop? Well, if you're really being dharmic, you're not necessarily even attempting to make them stop. Let's say if you're unarmed and you're up against 5 guys with machine guns, I mean, you're not going to make them stop realistically. If they're going to shoot you, they're going to shoot you. Maybe if you're dealing with a person who isn't just pure sociopathic evil, I mean, you may be able to reason with them calmly. Just being friendly works better as a general rule than being a friend works better than being an enemy. The best way to defeat an enemy is to turn them into a friend. It may be that they're not the sort of person that is worth being friends with. I mean, they'd be a bad friend, but at least you can just remain calm and not have hatred and anger in your heart, because that just makes things worse. And I think a lot of people in the West, they're so used to like a materialistic utilitarian ethic where, I mean, karma just isn't in the picture at all. That they don't really see that their own mental states do condition their own experience in just a fundamental, radically profound way. That we are, in a way, dreaming our way through life. We're not fully awake, and we are creating our own reality. And people that are born and raised in a Western culture, like spiritual Siberia, even if they might call themselves Buddhists, they just can't accept this. They just think it's woo-woo, touchy-feely, escape from reality stuff. That it's just, philosophizing pulled out of a rectum somewhere. But it is true. That, I mean, as a layperson, you have to do what needs to be done, which may involve, using violence to protect yourself, your family, your property, but still to use just the stoic approach of doing just what needs to be done just because it needs to be done, or the way of the samurai, the bushido. It's like no anger, no hatred, because that just makes things worse. So I guess that's the answer, the best answer I can give. I mean, sometimes being nonviolent may not work, especially if you have a family to protect. But at the very least, you do it with a minimum of negative emotion, a minimum of hate, a minimum of fear, a minimum of anger, Just remain as calm as you can. And if you can manage somehow any kind of compassion for this miserable wretch who's making problems for people, then that's even better. Because really, anybody who makes problems, anyone who's bad, is a suffering being. Happy people are more likely to just live and let live. The people that are just deliberately messing with people tend to be miserable people. And part of it is they're so miserable, they want to make somebody else more miserable than them just so that they can seem happy by comparison. So the standard Buddhist approach of dealing with enemies is beaming love at them, beaming metta, at least friendly feeling if you don't want to call it love. And that is just so extreme. It's so against human nature that it's unrealistic, especially if someone's already upset, to even advise them to do that. But still, at the very, very least, have the minimum amount of negative emotions and negative motivations, motivating your behavior, because it's just going to come back to you, and ultimately it's going to make things worse. And I guess that's it. And seriously, anyone wants to break into my house at night, I am loading the Glock. So be forewarned. And also, be happy.